Hi, my name is Mara, and I found out my dad left $2 million to my sister. And me? Nothing. No heads up, no conversation. No mention in his will, just a signature and silence. But that wasn't the betrayal. That was just the door cracking open. What came next? They didn't just cut me out of the estate. They used my name for loans, drained my bank account, turned me into a ghost in my own story. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a message, and I heard it loud and clear. It was a Saturday afternoon in October, the kind of Colorado autumn day where the leaves look like gold on fire. I was at my parents' place, like I always was around this time of year, helping Dad sort through his paper tornado of tax forms, old receipts, and warranty manuals no one had looked at since the Clinton administration. I wasn't expecting to stumble across a time bomb, just another envelope in the chaos. But this one was heavier, titled Last Will and Testament. I opened it without thinking. Curiosity always wins with me. And 3 lines in, my stomach turned to stone. Everything, every dollar, the house, the retirement accounts, the lake property, all of it was going to my sister. Not a mention of me, not a single line. I kept scanning the pages, my breath getting thinner. There had to be more. A note, a thank you. A footnote saying, "We know Mara helped cover the mortgage when Dad's back went out, or bought groceries when Mom was recovering, or sat on the phone for hours teaching them how to log into their email." Nothing. Just one insult disguised as affection. We leave this with equal love for both our daughters. Equal love. Sure. I slid the will back into the stack without a sound. Dad wandered back in with a mug and asked if I found the property tax form. "Not yet," I said with a smile so fake it should have cracked my face in half. I didn't bring it up that day. I didn't scream. I didn't storm out. Instead, I did what I always did. I swallowed it. Told myself there must be some explanation. A mix-up. A placeholder draft. Because the alternative? That my family decided I was disposable? That was too sharp to face head-on, at least not yet. 2 days later, I was knee-deep in a retirement portfolio for a client when my phone rang. Mom. "Hi, honey," she said, like nothing was wrong. "We've hit a little tight spot with the bills. Any chance you could send over $1,500 just to cover utilities and a few odds and ends?" And just like that, I said yes, because that's what I always did. Because I was the stable one, the helper, the reliable fallback daughter. I transferred the money during lunch and didn't think twice about it until later that night when I saw my sister's Instagram story. La Mer Spa, the bougie one near Boulder, white robes, champagne, massage oils. Captioned, self-care season, pre-holiday reset. I clicked through the photos, sushi, candles, wine, and realized exactly where that utility money had gone. I didn't confront them, not yet. Instead, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and let the betrayal settle around me. It was never about money. It was about being used, rewritten, replaced. That night, I stared at a picture on my shelf. Me and my sister, 8 years old, wearing matching dresses, arms slung around each other. The frame was cracked in the corner, but I never got around to fixing it. Now I just stared and let myself feel it for the first time. 3 days passed. I went to work. I answered emails. I laughed at bad jokes in the break room. But inside, I was unraveling. And then the second slap hit. It was a rainy Wednesday night when Dad called. He didn't ask how I was, didn't ease into the conversation, just said, "About what you saw last weekend. It's more complicated than you think." I stayed silent. "Your mom and I, we decided Vera needed it more. You've always been independent. You don't need the same kind of support." There it was. The script. The golden child versus the dependable one. I was the strong one, which apparently meant I could be erased guilt-free. "It's not about love," he added, like that made it better. "We love you. Equally." "Right," I said flatly. "Thanks for clarifying." And I hung up. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat there in the dark, letting the truth sink its claws into me. Later that night, I pulled out an old shoebox from my closet. It was filled with scrapbooks, birthday cards, notes from school, memories. Except now, they felt like props in someone else's story, not mine. I remembered how I got second place in a 6th grade spelling bee, And Dad asked me to let Vera win next time because she was more sensitive. How, at my honors dinner, no one even mentioned my name, but Vera got a whole speech for passing algebra. How they raised me to be the background so she could be the main event. And I let them. The next night, my cousin Clara called. We weren't close. Just occasional Facebook likes and birthday texts. She hesitated before saying, I heard something about the will. I didn't want to pry, but Uncle Caden used to say you were doing fine, that Vera needed more help. So they've been saying that for a while? I asked. Honestly? Yeah. There was no but that could fix it. They hadn't forgotten me. They chose to leave me out. That night, I stood in front of the family photo wall in my hallway. Niagara Falls, birthdays, barbecues, Christmas. One by one, I took down the pictures. I didn't burn them, didn't rip them up, just put them in a box, slid it under my bed, and closed the drawer. Not out of rage, out of clarity. A week passed, and on the surface, nothing changed. I still showed up to work on time, nodded through meetings, and smiled at the receptionist like I wasn't slowly drowning behind my own eyes. But inside, things were unraveling piece by piece, and I didn't know how to stop it. It was Sunday morning, the kind that pretends to be peaceful with soft sunlight and quiet sidewalks, but it felt hollow. I was sitting on my couch sipping lukewarm coffee when I opened Instagram out of habit. That's when I saw the photo that cracked something in me that might never fully heal. Vera had posted a throwback. Her and Dad, standing together at the lake near Estes Park, arms around each other, smiling like some Hallmark card come to life. The caption said, "My rock, my everything. Dad goals forever." I stared at it, not because it was sweet, but because it felt off. My memory flickered because I knew that photo. I had the original. There had been 3 of us in it. Me, standing on the other side of Dad, laughing just the same. But in her version, I was gone, cropped out. Literally edited out of a family memory like I'd never existed. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my phone. I just sat there, watching the way a person could rewrite history with one filter and a little crop tool. That image stayed in my head long after I closed the app. Later that afternoon, I pulled out an old hard drive and opened the folder labeled Family Trips. I found the original photo within minutes. Sure enough, I was right there smiling included, remembered. Not anymore. That's when it hit me. They weren't just overlooking me. They were actively removing me. Not just emotionally, visibly, publicly. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. I started combing through old photos after that, not because I needed proof, but because I needed to know how deep the erasure went. One by one, I opened files and scrolled, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. In the images posted online, I was always just out of frame. Smiles never quite angled toward me. Arms looped around each other but never me. Conversations that swirled around dinners where I paid the check, but somehow didn't make the memory. I remembered my college graduation. I'd earned a full scholarship to an Ivy League. At the family dinner that night, no one said a word about it. Instead, they celebrated Vera's job interview. Not the job, just the fact that someone had emailed her back. She worked so hard, Mom had said proudly, like effort alone made her a hero. I was told I didn't need the spotlight because I shined on my own. At the time, it sounded like love. Now, it sounded like dismissal wrapped in flattery. That evening, I opened an old photo album from our childhood. There was one picture at the Grand Canyon. All 4 of us were in it. Dad's arm around Vera, Mom's hand on her shoulder. I stood beside them, smiling the same way, but untouched, unclaimed. Maybe it had always been this way. Maybe I just didn't want to see it until now. And maybe that was the most painful part, not that I was erased, but that I spent so long pretending I wasn't. By Monday, I was running on autopilot. Work became my refuge. Numbers didn't lie. Spreadsheets didn't play favorites. At least in the office, I wasn't invisible. Around noon, an email popped up. It was from the front desk. I had visitors. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked downstairs, confused, only to find them Dad, Mom, and Vera lined up like they were staging an intervention. Dad looked tight and composed, like he'd rehearsed this moment. Mom offered a thin, performative smile. Vera barely looked at me, too busy scanning the room like she was the one wronged. You can't ignore us forever, Dad said immediately, skipping over any polite greeting. Mom's voice was falsely gentle. Sweetheart, we just want to talk. Don't make this bigger than it is. I stood still, my spine locked in place. You already made it bigger, I said quietly. When you decided I wasn't your daughter anymore, Vera scoffed. It's just a will. You act like it's some personal attack. I turned to her and smiled, not from humor, but from sheer exhaustion. You don't get to decide how someone reacts to being erased. I looked them each in the eye. I didn't ask for anything. You gave it all to her without even telling me, then kept using me as your financial backup. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away. Back at my desk, I closed the blinds, shut off notifications, and tried to bury the conversation behind contracts and deadlines. But less than an hour later, a notification pinged on my phone. A debit alert taught $2,500 gone from an account I hadn't touched in years. One I'd opened to help Mom cover medical bills back when she was struggling. I'd forgotten it existed. Apparently, she hadn't. I logged into the app and saw the transaction, a wire transfer to an event venue. An expensive one. I called the bank immediately. They confirmed it was a legal transaction. She was a co-holder. Nothing they could do. I sat at my desk, my coffee turning bitter in my mouth. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about entitlement. About the audacity to take from me and still claim I was ungrateful. I opened our old group chat, me, Mom, Dad, Vera. It had been dormant for months. No one had said a word since I first asked about the will, but I typed anyway. This is the last time you take anything from me without my consent. And then I hit send. No emotion, no anger. Just a statement of fact. A boundary finally spoken aloud. 2 days later, I was in my kitchen making tea when my phone rang. Unknown number. Local area code? I answered, assuming it might be work. It wasn't. Hi, this is Allison from Equifax Identity Services. We're calling to verify a recent co-signature on a personal line of credit issued under your name. My mind blanked. I hadn't co-signed anything. Who's the secondary signer? I asked. Sorrel Elmore, she said. My mother. My jaw tightened. My fingers wrapped around the countertop like it might stop the world from spinning. No, I said firmly. I did not authorize this. That's identity fraud. She paused. Thank you. We'll open a dispute and send you the documents. But please be aware that because it involves a known relative, the investigation may take time. I hung up and stood there, breathing through my teeth, the kettle screaming behind me. There was no pretending anymore. No more giving them the benefit of the doubt. They weren't confused. They weren't misguided. They knew exactly what they were doing. I didn't send a polite message. I didn't start a conversation. I called her. Direct, sharp, cold. She picked up after the third ring. Sweetheart, she said, like she hadn't just committed fraud. I thought you might call. You used my name, I said. You forged my identity. She sighed, almost annoyed. We needed it. You wouldn't have agreed. But it's family. We help each other. I closed my eyes. Families ask. Families respect. They don't steal. And I ended the call, just like that. Later that night, Vera texted. Seriously? You're doing all this over a will? Grow up. Then Mom chimed in on the group thread. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. They weren't even hiding anymore. They saw themselves as victims. I was the villain. Not for what I'd done, but for no longer agreeing to be their silent accomplice. That evening, I posted something for the first time in months. Just a quiet, public truth. No names, no attacks, just facts. For years, I supported my family. Financially, emotionally, silently. I told myself that was love. Until I realized love doesn't demand silence in the face of betrayal. I found out I was erased from the family will. Then I found a fraudulent loan in my name. I stayed quiet. They didn't. So here's the truth. They didn't just cut me out of the will. They cut me out of the family long before that. I didn't care who saw it. I didn't post it for likes. I posted it to breathe. Because silence protects liars. But the truth? It doesn't need to scream. It just needs to live. The morning after I posted the truth, I expected backlash or at least whispers. But what I got instead was silence eerily hollow. like the kind you hear before a storm rolls in. No texts, no comments, not even a passive-aggressive emoji from Vera. At first, it felt like relief. Maybe they'd finally backed off. Maybe they realized I wasn't going to play my part anymore. But by the end of the week, that silence started to feel less like surrender and more like a trap. It was too quiet, too careful. And then came the letter. I was at my desk finishing a quarterly report when the receptionist buzzed. "Hey Mara, someone just dropped off a letter for you. Hand delivered, no return address, but it's official. Legal letterhead." I met her at the front and took the envelope, heart already racing. Back at my desk, I turned it over slowly. The logo at the top was from a local law firm, Henry & Clark. The name stung because I knew it. They were the same attorneys who handled my father's estate paperwork. I opened it and scanned the contents, line by line. It was a formal cease and desist. Apparently, my Facebook post had caused emotional harm and defamation to my mother. It accused me of spreading misinformation, damaging reputations, and airing private family matters for public sympathy. I read it twice, then a third time. The irony sat heavy in my mouth. They forged my name on a loan, drained my bank account, removed me from the will. And now I was the threat because I finally spoke up. I didn't react outwardly. I scanned the document, saved a copy to my encrypted drive, and created a new folder labeled Defense. No panic, no retaliation, just documentation. Because if they wanted to play this publicly, I wasn't going to scream louder. I was going to be smarter. That night, I sat in my apartment with the lights dimmed and the city glowing beyond my window. I poured a glass of water, not wine, because I needed clarity, not comfort. I replayed everything from the beginning. Every small betrayal that used to feel like coincidence. Every unspoken moment that now looked like a decision. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from Nala, an old friend from college. We hadn't talked in over a year. She didn't ask how I was or say hello. Just sent me a voice file. "You need to hear this." I hesitated before hitting play. What I heard stopped me cold. It was my voice. Or at least it sounded like my voice. Chopped, stitched, unnaturally timed. A Frankenstein version of something I never actually said. The message had been edited to make it sound like I called my mother manipulative. A liar, a leech. The words were mine, but not in that order. Not with that meaning. It was a digital patchwork, twisted into something cruel. "Did you really say this?" Nala texted afterward, her tone unsure. I didn't blame her for doubting. The clip was convincing if you didn't know me. I replied immediately, telling her I had the full call recorded, unedited, time-stamped, and stored. She didn't respond right away, and I didn't push, because that was the goal: confuse the audience. Blur the line between truth and drama until no one knows what to believe. They didn't need to prove I was a liar. They just had to make enough people unsure. That was the game now. They couldn't silence me, so they tried to distort me. I opened a clean document on my laptop and started typing. Not a rant, a timeline. A file full of dates, screenshots, call logs, photos, transactions. Every time I'd paid a bill. Every message I'd sent. Every post they'd altered or deleted. I built a trail not of emotion, but of evidence. And as I worked, I realized I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was building something bigger than their accusations. I was building the truth they didn't think I had the nerve to show. By the following weekend, my name had made its way into local gossip forums. Nothing scandalous, just thinly veiled posts like, "What would you do if your daughter turned against you over money?" Or, "When family turns toxic, do you go public or stay quiet?" I knew exactly who was behind them. Their fingerprints were all over the phrasing. My mother's church friends began posting cryptic quotes about forgiveness and betrayal. One even shared a verse about honoring your parents, tagged with, "Some of us still remember what loyalty means." It would have been laughable if it didn't sting so deep, because these were the same people who braided my hair for Easter plays, who handed me cookies after Sunday school. Now they were all taking quiet sides. And not one of them asked me what really happened. But the worst hit wasn't from a stranger. It was from Vera. She posted a photo of Dad on her feed, smiling in front of the fireplace, wearing his old hiking jacket. Her caption read, "No matter what, I'll always choose love over greed. That one line burned more than all the rest combined, because she didn't need to say my name. She knew everyone would understand who the villain in her story was supposed to be. I watched the comments roll in. So, sorry you're going through this. You're the strong one. Family always finds its way back. And not one person questioned it. Not one person paused to ask why the daughter with a master's degree, a clean financial record, and years of sacrifice would suddenly go rogue for attention. They didn't want the truth. They wanted the version that comforted them. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't engage. Instead, I printed screenshots. I updated the timeline. I saved every post, every tag, every snide remark disguised as wisdom. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was recording. Then, as if the universe wanted to test how much I could endure, I got another message from the family group chat, this time from Dad. If you really cared about us, you'd stop dragging our name through the mud. You're being a problem, not a daughter. That line echoed in my mind for days. A problem, like a broken faucet or a late bill. Something to be fixed, silenced, ignored. Not a person, not blood, just noise. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I wrote it down in my journal and underlined it. I'm not being a daughter. I'm being a donor, because that's what I'd been to them all along. Free money, free time, free labor, until I stopped being free. A few nights later, I was sitting in bed with receipts spread out like playing cards when my cousin Clara called again. Her voice was hushed, like she didn't want to be overheard. I should have told you earlier, she said, barely above a whisper. Your mom knew about the will before it was finalized. She told everyone you wouldn't understand. Said not to bring it up with you because it would cause trouble. I sat in silence, letting the words absorb. She wasn't just complicit. She orchestrated it. She didn't stumble into betrayal. She mapped it out and warned others not to blow her cover. I didn't ask Clara for proof. I didn't need it. I could hear the guilt in her voice, and I already knew the truth. I thanked her calmly, even though my hands were clenched so tight my knuckles ached. After we hung up, I sat alone in my room for what felt like hours. Not because I was stunned, because I wasn't anymore. That part of me had gone numb. This was just confirmation of what my gut had been screaming since the moment I read that will, that my mother wasn't caught in the middle. She was standing at the podium, directing the whole thing. The next afternoon, I stopped by the grocery store after work. Just milk and eggs. I didn't want to think, just wanted something to keep my hands busy. But as I walked toward the entrance, I saw her Vera, standing near the flower stand like she was waiting for a camera crew. She spotted me immediately and smiled, but not kindly. She tilted her head and said, "So, how's your little pity parade going?" I didn't flinch. I didn't play the game. I just looked her in the eye and said, "You may have their will, but I have their truth, and I'm not done speaking." Her smile twitched. Only slightly, but enough. I walked past her without another word. By the time I reached home, I felt something different. Not rage, not grief, something cleaner. I opened my journal and wrote one line. They wanted me to stay quiet, so they could tell their version uninterrupted. But I'm still here, and I've got time. Then I closed it, lit a candle, and let the silence sit in the room with me, not as a weight, but as space I'd finally reclaimed. 2 mornings after seeing Vera outside the store, I woke up before the sun had finished stretching over the city skyline. The air in my apartment felt still, heavier than usual, like something was waiting. I moved through the motions, brushing my teeth, starting the kettle, staring blankly at the cracked window pane above my sink, until a single notification slid onto my phone screen like a whisper. It was an email from Thorne, my father's former attorney. I hadn't heard from him in years, not since he'd helped them with their estate planning and drafted their original will. The subject line read, "Regarding the Elmore estate, discrepancy detected." My heart didn't race this time. I'd run out of panic weeks ago. Instead, I opened the email with the same calm I used when filing damage reports. His message was brief, precise, and clipped in that lawyerly way that says too much by saying very little. "Mara, I have reason to believe the second version of your father's will may contain significant inconsistencies. Please review the attached documents at your earliest convenience. We need to talk." I opened the files, 2 wills side by side. One from over a year ago, my name clearly there, listed for a portion of the assets, alongside a modest donation to an animal shelter Dad once volunteered at. The other, well, the one filed after his pneumonia hospitalization, looked colder, clean lines, clinical. No mention of me, just Vera, everything handed to her in full. But even through the digital document, I could see what Thorne saw. The signature was off, the flow different. The ink used for the initials didn't match the one on the notarization line. The date stood out, 2 marked the same weekend. Dad was in the hospital, barely able to speak, let alone hold a pen. I didn't cry, I didn't gasp. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to my lawyer with a short note, "Please advise." Possible forgery? Then I replied to Thorne, "Available anytime after 2. Thank you." That was it. Just quiet movement, no dramatics. Because at this point, they weren't just rewriting history, they might have committed a felony while doing it. Later that afternoon, I met Thorne at his office downtown. Everything about the space felt familiar, warm-toned wood. The smell of coffee and old leather chairs. The same brass clock ticking softly in the background. He looked older than I remembered, but just as sharp. "I can't officially advise unless you retain me," he said as we sat. "But off the record, this doesn't look right. Not just morally, but legally." I waited. He continued, more carefully this time. "If your father was incapacitated during the signing, and your mother orchestrated this without full transparency, especially without spousal co-signature, there are issues. Joint property in Colorado doesn't transfer like that without consent. There's also potential coercion, depending on what hospital records show about his state of mind." He slid a copy of the older will across the desk. I placed my hand over it without looking down. "Someone already sent documents anonymously to the State Legal Review Board," he added after a pause. "If that wasn't you, someone else is watching too." That part caught me off guard. Not because I was surprised someone noticed, but because for the first time in this mess, it meant I wasn't the only one who had seen the wrong and said, "Enough." That night, I returned home and didn't turn on the lights right away. I sat by the window with the folder in my lap, watching the orange glow of traffic spill across the street like a lazy river of movement. I thought about every time I gave them the benefit of the doubt, every time I lowered my voice instead of raising a question, every time I called it loyalty, when it was really just fear wearing politeness like a mask. I reached for my laptop and logged into my old blog, a dusty relic from grad school that I used to treat like a diary with an audience. I hadn't touched it in years. I created a new post but didn't title it at first. I just typed. When they tried to erase me from paper, I wrote myself back in ink. Then I published it without turning on comments. No hashtags. No invitations. Just a sentence. Just breath. 3 hours later, I got a message from Vera. "This is getting out of hand. Take it down. You're humiliating us." I read it once and then put the phone down without replying. Their discomfort wasn't my emergency. Not anymore. I didn't feel joy and I didn't feel guilt. Just clarity. Like I'd finally pulled a shard of glass from my ribs that had been lodged there so long I'd stopped feeling the pain. The next week unfolded with odd stillness. No letters. No dramatic confrontations. Just subtle shifts in the air, like a chessboard where no one wanted to admit the king was exposed. I kept working. I kept documenting. I met with a handwriting analyst, sent in the original and revised documents, and requested my father's medical records from the hospital where he stayed that weekend. My attorney filed an inquiry for undue influence. Everything was slow, bureaucratic, but it was moving. Meanwhile, the first stayed quiet on social media. Not because I was hiding, but because I didn't need to shout. The truth had already found oxygen. People started messaging privately. Old coworkers, childhood neighbors, even an ex who'd seen Vera's posts, and said, "I always knew something was off with your family." Their words weren't apologies, but they were acknowledgments. And sometimes that's louder than an "I'm sorry." One day at work, just before lunch, my assistant buzzed me again. "Someone's here." She doesn't have an appointment. I stepped into the lobby expecting another ambush. Instead, I saw Mrs. Delaney, an older client I hadn't worked with in years. Her gray curls had thinned, but her presence hadn't. "You probably don't remember me," she said softly. "You helped me save my home after my husband passed." I never forgot that. I read what you wrote. I just wanted you to know some people see you, the real you. She didn't stay long, just enough to say it, then she was gone. But her words followed me through the rest of the day like a light I could tuck in my pocket. That evening, I got home to find a cream envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in soft blue ink. Inside was a single sentence written in careful cursive. You didn't deserve any of it. I'm sorry, Clara. No fanfare, no explanations. Just truth. I didn't text her back. I didn't tell anyone. I slid the note into my journal and closed the cover without a sound. Because not all truths need to be screamed. Some just need to exist. That weekend, I walked through the farmer's market alone. No headphones, no distractions. Just letting my steps move without urgency. I passed a little booth selling pottery and found a mug that looked like it had been cracked and mended with gold, the Japanese art of kintsugi. I picked it up and smiled. Not because it was beautiful, but because it felt honest. A flaw turned artifact, a break turned badge. When I got home, I made tea in that mug, sat by my window again, and opened my laptop not to post, not to argue, but to write. Not about revenge, not about exposure, but about breath, about what it means to grow up thinking silence is strength, only to learn that sometimes strength is what you find after you stop being silent. I wrote about grief that doesn't come from death but from realization, about losing people who are still alive but unreachable. I didn't name them. I didn't need to. The story wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. And finally, it was mine. 3 weeks passed like slow thunder. The kind you feel before you hear. The snow that once softened the sidewalks had started to melt into gritty slush, exposing everything beneath it, salt, dirt, forgotten footprints. It felt poetic somehow, watching the city thaw while I was still somewhere between frozen and waking. The mornings came quicker, less bitter, but still sharp enough to sting if you forgot gloves. But I hadn't forgotten anything. Not anymore. I hadn't followed the court proceedings in real time. I didn't refresh legal updates or camp out in front of courthouse blogs. There was no thrill in tracking every play. I didn't need a front row seat to a fall I hadn't pushed. Instead, I waited quietly, letting the truth move at its own pace, like water through stone. The summary came in a clean email from Thorne on a Friday morning. No fluff, just facts. Kadrian Elmore has been summoned for formal inquiry regarding estate irregularities. Sorrel Elmore declined to offer a statement. Further review pending. That was it. No explosive drama. No TV-ready confessions. Just silence. But this time, their silence was different, not protective. Not smug. This one sounded scared. It sounded like people who realized they couldn't delete what was already documented. That morning, instead of diving into messages or scrolling past curated perfection on social media, I put on my coat and walked 2 blocks to a little cafe I hadn't visited in years. The bell above the door still jingled the same way it used to when I'd come here during finals to cry into cinnamon lattes. The same woman behind the counter, Marta, looked up and smiled like I hadn't disappeared for half a decade. "Mara," she said, wide-eyed but warm, "look at you. Where have you been hiding?" I smiled, shook the cold off my coat, and answered honestly, rediscovering air. She chuckled and handed me a black coffee before I could ask. "It's on the house. You always tipped too much." I took it, not out of guilt or politeness, but because it felt earned. I sat by the window and watched strangers move through their ordinary routines, couples arguing gently over pastries, kids tugging gloves loose with sticky fingers, someone in a suit tapping on a cracked screen with a kind of urgency I no longer envied. I didn't bring my laptop to work. I didn't open my email. I pulled out my journal and wrote one line, "Sometimes survival looks like stillness, not fire." Then I finished my coffee and walked back into the world without needing to carry the weight of their silence anymore. Later that afternoon, I was organizing client folders at work when the front desk buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a lawyer or an unexpected visitor. It was an envelope. No logo, no letterhead, just a single name printed on a cream fold, Mara. The first opened it at my desk. Inside, a handwritten note in blocky, uncertain print. "You were right. I didn't want to see it then. I do now. You deserved better, Jay." It didn't say who Jay was, but I knew. It was Jake, my cousin on Dad's side. The one who always played peacemaker at holiday dinners, who told awkward jokes to drown out tension, who probably thought not picking a side was a form of loyalty. His silence used to hurt more than outright betrayal. Now, this note didn't heal anything, but it softened something. I folded it neatly and placed it beside Clara's in the back of my journal. I wasn't collecting apologies. I was collecting acknowledgement, the kind that couldn't be spun or erased later. That night, I logged into Facebook again, not to scroll, not to post, just to see. And I saw it immediately. Vera's feed had gone quiet. No inspirational quotes. No throwbacks with curated nostalgia. Just a new post with a filtered photo of a snowy driveway and a caption that read, "Not all storms come to disrupt. Some come to clear a path." The irony made me laugh. They'd treated me like a storm, like I was the one who blew through their lives, tearing things apart. But all I ever did was stop pretending. I was okay with being erased. The damage wasn't mine. The cracks had always been there. I just stopped covering them. The next day, a different kind of message landed in my inbox. It was from a small nonprofit in Denver that supported adult children of narcissistic parents. One of the founders had read my blog post and invited me to speak at a workshop. Nothing fancy. Just a roundtable for women trying to untangle their identity from family roles they never asked for. I almost said no. My first instinct was still to shrink, still to think maybe I was overreacting. But then I thought about the fake voicemail, the altered will, the spa bill disguised as utilities. And I said yes, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to make meaning out of what they tried to make small. The day of the workshop, I sat in a circle of folding chairs with 12 other women who looked nothing alike but carried the same wound. One woman spoke about being called dramatic every time she cried. Another said she was still afraid of taking up space at her own dinner table. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I told my story the way I remembered it, without gloss, without venom, just the truth. And when I finished, no one clapped. No one patted my back. They just nodded. One woman leaned forward and whispered, "Thank you for saying it out loud." And somehow, that meant more than applause ever could. Later that evening, I was sitting in my apartment, reading through the scanned affidavits from Thorne, when a message popped up from a name I hadn't seen in over a decade. Miss Helen, my high school English teacher. She'd always been sharp, dry-humored, and unshakable. She messaged, "Saw what's happening. Just wanted you to know some people noticed a long time ago. We just didn't know how to say it without sounding cruel. You always deserved better." I sat with that for a long time, thinking about all the years I felt invisible in my own house, but somehow seen by strangers. I realized then that truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives in pieces, inside comments, in folded notes, in moments of delayed courage. But when it comes, it's undeniable. That weekend, I visited a print shop and made copies of every page from the older will. I didn't distribute them. I didn't post them. I simply placed them in a fireproof folder and labeled it Reclaim. Then I tucked it into my safe. Because this story wasn't going to end in chaos. It was going to end in record. They could pretend I didn't exist. They could Photoshop, edit, block, unfollow. But the paper didn't lie. The ink was permanent, and I had enough of it now to write myself back into every page they tried to tear out. The city had started to shift. Morning air no longer bit at the skin. It brushed past gently, as if winter had loosened its grip just enough to let you breathe again. The sidewalks, once stained with salt and slush, were drying into pale outlines of where the ice used to live. And somehow my body felt the same, lighter. Not healed, not fixed, but finally free from holding my breath. I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I wasn't checking my phone for another blow or prepping answers to accusations I never earned. The fire was gone, but the warmth had stayed. It was the kind that came not from revenge, but from reclamation. I didn't sit through the entire legal review. I didn't need to. Thorne kept me updated with measured emails, each one more validating than the last. The final note was short. Per the estate inquiry, a court order has invalidated the revised will, due to improper execution and potential coercion. Your father's original documentation has been reinstated. That was it. No courtroom breakdown, no dramatic outbursts, just legal acknowledgement that something had been taken from me, and it was being returned not out of pity, but because it had always been mine. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post a victory speech or send a message to Vera, because this wasn't a win that needed celebration. It was a balance that had quietly been corrected. The family group chat stayed silent. No one addressed the decision. No one reached out. No phone calls. No texts. Not even a passive-aggressive prayer emoji. That silence used to slice through me, but now it just sounded like a closed door. And I'd stopped knocking. The people who raised me had built a version of love I didn't recognize anymore. One that asked me to sacrifice, then accused me of selfishness when I ran out of pieces to give. They called it loyalty when I went without. They called it betrayal when I finally said no. But I'd learned something: they never wanted me to figure out loyalty without respect is just servitude dressed in guilt. I started spending more time in places that didn't carry the weight of their voices. Coffee shops where no one knew my last name. Bookstores where the only silence came from pages turning. Even the grocery store felt different. I took my time in aisles I used to rush through, choosing things I liked without running a mental calculation of who else needed what more. It was a slow kind of rebuilding, one small freedom at a time. One evening, I found myself reaching for a second mug at the counter of a small ceramic shop, almost out of habit. I paused, then smiled to myself, and picked a different one. No matching set, no pairing required. Just 2 mugs, both mine, neither needing to explain their place. I went back to the workshop one Saturday, not to speak this time, just to listen. One woman talked about her mother ignoring her for years, then acting confused when she stopped showing up. Another said she felt guilty for feeling relief when her sister moved away. I understood all of it, not because the details matched mine, but because the ache underneath them did. That quiet ache of being raised to feel like you only belonged when you were useful. And how terrifying it was to wonder if anyone would still love you if you stopped earning it. I didn't speak that day, but afterward, someone tapped my shoulder and asked if I was the one who wrote the blog. I nodded. She smiled and said, "Your words made me feel seen. That was enough." Weeks later, I took a walk along the river trail where Dad used to take us when we were kids. I hadn't been back since the summer before everything changed. The path was mostly empty, except for a few cyclists and a woman jogging with a golden retriever. The same old tree with the knotted trunk was still there, the one we used to race to as kids. I stopped, rested my hand against the bark, and felt nothing sharp, no grief, no rage. Just a quiet kind of memory. I didn't forgive him, I didn't need to. What I needed was what I had already given myself, the ability to walk past that tree and not feel like I was 12 years old and invisible again. When I got home that evening, I lit a candle, not for ritual, but for presence. I opened my journal to a fresh page and wrote, "I am not a victim of my family's choices. I am the author of my own boundaries." Then I tucked away the pages of court findings, photocopies of bank statements, and screenshots of forged applications. Not because they were no longer true, but because I didn't need to carry them in my hands anymore. I'd carried them in my body long enough. The proof had served its purpose. The truth had landed, and I had walked away still standing. The final twist came not from a courtroom or a headline, but from a quiet email 2 months later. The nonprofit I had spoken for wanted to feature my story in a digital series about financial abuse and emotional erasure. They asked for my permission to share it anonymously, just as it was, unedited. I agreed. Not for revenge, not for recognition, but because I knew someone out there needed to read it the way I had once needed to write it, without shame, without sugarcoating, just honestly. Because I had learned something else too. Speaking the truth doesn't always fix what's broken, but it does free the person who lived through it. That spring, I planted a single lavender bush on my balcony. I'd never grown anything before. I wasn't sure it would survive the unpredictable weather or my inconsistent attention. But I watered it every other day and let the sun do the rest. Slowly, it grew. 1 stem, then 3. Not fast. Not perfect, but persistent. I'd sit beside it in the mornings, sipping coffee from one of the mismatched mugs, and watch it bend with the wind but never snap. And I saw myself in it, not as I was during the storm, but as I was now, still rooted, still standing, still soft. Sometimes, I think about reaching out to Clara again. Sometimes I wonder what it would feel like to ask Jake what changed his mind. But then I remind myself that healing doesn't always need more dialogue. Sometimes the silence is where the real peace lives. Not the silence they used to punish me, but the one I chose, the one that holds space instead of shame. And if you're reading this because something in your story feels familiar because you've been the reliable one, the overlooked one, the one whose love was mistaken for obedience, I want you to know something. You're not alone, you're not broken, and you don't have to keep setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. Your value doesn't decrease just because someone else fails to see it. Your truth matters even if they pretend it doesn't. And your silence, let it be yours. Not something forced on you, but something you own, something you choose. Like I did. I didn't get a movie ending, no reunion, no redemptive apology. But I got something better. I got clarity. I got air. I got myself back. And that, after everything, is enough. Now it's your turn. If you've ever been the quiet one carrying everyone else, the one left out of the photo, the one erased without a sound, share your story. Speak it. Even if just in a comment, even if only to yourself. Because once the silence breaks, what remains is real. What remains is you. Story 2. Hello, this is Manfred. My folks labeled me ungrateful on Thanksgiving. Out in public, to my face. However, the true treachery wasn't that. The actual treachery had been planned for years. For instance, they depleted my college funds to finance my stepbrother. For example, how I was removed from the family montage, as if I didn't exist. For years I kept silent, but now I'm speaking up. I purposely arrived 38 minutes late, not by chance. I reasoned that I may blend in and get away from the typical farce if I arrived after everyone had already been energized by wine and carbohydrates. I was mistaken. As soon as I entered my father's home, the home where I was raised, the one that no longer had the same appearance, just long enough for me to sense it, everything stopped. The half-second pause and welcomes, the tiny change in the air, eyes darting away and toward me. Though their eyes did not grin, people did. Marlene, my stepmother, came over wearing heels that were too high for her comfort, and arms spread too far. She's there. All sugar, she said. We were just discussing you. A liar! I gave in to her embrace. A brief tap on the shoulder that had the scent of authority and department shop perfume. Beckett was already holding court with 2 uncles and a church family friend when I noticed him across the room. Like I was someone he dimly recognized from high school, he raised his whiskey glass toward me. I looked around for Cheryl. She was giggling near the kitchen island. Too perfect, too loud. She appeared to fit right in. I didn't. With customized place cards, pie bars, and golden leaves, they had created a monument to Thanksgiving table settings. Marlene probably hired someone to put it on stage. Nothing in this place. It appeared to be family, only branding. As I made my way to the dining room, I overheard bits of conversation that were unrelated to me. A real estate transaction, the promotion of Beckett, Harlan's VFW retirement speech. Nobody inquired about my well-being. I didn't think they would. The toast followed. Marlene got up and clinked her wine glass. She started, I just wanted to say how thankful I am for all of you before we eat. It has been a difficult year. Nevertheless, we are now closer, stronger, and more unified than before. I clenched my jaw. She looked across at the large table. This amazing family deserves a glass. To those that come. To everyone who helps. Indeed, even to those who lack gratitude. There was laughing around the table. My ears felt like they were flooded with blood. I avoided eye contact. I didn't have to. I knew who she was referring to. Nobody spoke. She was not stopped. They simply drank. I kept my glass untouchable. Rather, I wished I hadn't arrived as I gazed down at the dish before me. After clearing his throat, my father shifted the topic. Harlan, classic. Let it go. Stay out of the fight. Act as though it never occurred. We have 3 types of stuffing and turkey, he remarked. Let's get started. I didn't shout even though I wanted to. I gave a faint smile. It worsened over dessert 30 minutes later. By then, Marlene's tongue was more flexible and she was drinking 3 cups. She said that to no one in particular, you know. When Maddie isn't practicing law, she's most often at home with her books and kitties. Isn't that correct, my love? On the inside of my cheek, I bit down. With a pre-existing sneer, Beckett added his voice, preserving the world, a furious email at a time. The room stiffened, with a few courteous giggles floating about. Not enough to prevent anything. Only enough to make you feel uncomfortable for 5 seconds. After that, they went on. As usual. I said nothing at all. The problem with this family is that you are not stabbed in the back by them. They do it in person while grinning. You're overly sensitive when you flinch. Even though my chest wasn't stable, I took a drink of water with steady hands. I looked around the room. This house has been completely renovated, updated, and sanitized. There are no pictures of myself on the walls. The visage of Beckett, however, was everywhere. Vacations, a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and graduations. The pride of the family was his success. Mine was a hassle. When I did, I knew better than to speak. The outcome was always the same. Harlan sighed with disappointment. Marlene's fictitious worry. Beckett. Grin. Cyril's quiet. I was positioned as the challenging one, and each of them had a certain function. The one who couldn't let go, the outsider. But tonight, something changed. It wasn't anger, not even melancholy. There was quiet, cold and sharp. Absolutely. I had no place here. Perhaps it wasn't a tragedy either. Perhaps I had been avoiding that freedom. I grinned as a result. I raised my glass. To me, not to others, and vowed in silence. Never again. I put down my glass with more poise than I actually felt. They were unaware, or perhaps they did, and decided not to give a damn. In any case, I had had enough of expecting recognition. After clearing his throat, Harlan got up and tapped softly on his wine glass. Falk. He started the room, quieting with disciplined obedience. Before dessert. I have a few things to say. After all, it's Thanksgiving. We're going God. He looked straight ahead as he stated, the foundation of legacy is family and inheritances. No, they don't construct themselves. They demand sacrifice, dedication, devotion. Beside him, Marlene nodded in agreement. Like a self-satisfied debutante, she folded her hands in her lap. He went on, we've recently taken steps to ensure that everything we've built and worked for will remain in the right hands. My stomach dropped. I felt like I was being slapped by the fact that he never once said my name. He mentioned Cyril's successful restaurant, Beckett's recent business venture, their shared ideals, and their commitment to the family's mission. Not a word about the company I started from scratch. I didn't mention my pro bono job. No indication that I ever mattered. He also said that people shouldn't expect their family to go with them if they leave them. Slowly, as if he had been waiting for this, Beckett grinned. Cyril's gaze lowered to her plate. Nobody else recoiled. I felt like screaming. That's not fair, I wanted someone to say. However, nobody did. All of them were complicit. The lights went off just as I believed I had experienced enough humiliation for the evening. We've got a small surprise. Trilling, Marlene raised a memorial video. 40 years of family recollections. As the TV flashed to life, I was gasping for air. Harlan and uniform photos started to fade. Marlene wearing soccer gear when pregnant with Cyril Beckett. Christmas mornings. Trips to the beach. Recitals of dance. But not a single picture of myself. Not one. 10 years went by, as if I had never been a part of this household. Then, for a moment, a group picture at a cookout in the backyard. I was there, behind everyone else. Blurry. Nameless. An additional ornamental piece. At the end of the table, a child murmured, "Who is that woman?" My chest tightened. I balled my hands into fists under the napkin. I was not overlooked. They eliminated me. It was more than just negligence. It was accurate. A deliberate removal. The lights returned. The room was filled with applause. Nobody gave me a look. All of them went on, surrounded by knife-like grins. I sat still. The banter and laughing came back, as if I hadn't just witnessed my own existence being wiped out. Exiting the table in the bathroom mirror, I excused myself. I witnessed it. Not melancholy. Something colder, not rage. Something more profound. Recognition. They didn't want to see me, so they didn't, because they had to admit all they had done and taken in order to meet me. This has nothing to do with missing a dinner toast or a video. Being written out of a family was the topic of discussion, page per page, until I was no longer even a footnote. Dessert was brought when I got back to the table. Pie made with pumpkin, whipped cream, slices that are perfectly sliced, similar to everything else in this staged performance. Nobody inquired about my whereabouts. I gazed at the platter while picking up my fork. I didn't taste anything since I sat in silence, with a single idea running through my mind as others spoke, laughed, and complimented one another. I'm no longer one of them. Perhaps I never was. I excused myself as gently as possible, left my plate alone, and went down the hall to the guest room. Even though nothing significant had ever been done there, they nevertheless referred to it as the office. I took a seat on the futon's edge, still wearing heels. The beige carpet was the focus of attention. The recollections began to seep in at that point. Years ago, one night seemed strangely similar to another. My graduation from law school. I was the only one who had crossed that level. Everybody others cheered in rows. Parents, siblings with placards, and girlfriends sobbing in front of their phones. There was no one in my chair. They must be late or caught in traffic, I kept telling myself. However, they never arrived. Marlene later informed me that Beckett's birthday meal was planned. We had to see it. He's only 30 once. I found out my specific position in this household below that day. Ease of use. As though taunting me, the cheers from that graduation reverberated in my mind, cheering for someone who was alone. I took my phone out of my bag and looked away while I scrolled. To stop the echo, all you have to do is move anything. I saw the email at that point. It had arrived months after the bank's graduation. My mother had saved money for my education fund. To save, she put in double shifts, disappeared, moved out. Harland signed off on it. His voice was trembling when I phoned him. Beckett had his chance. He required encouragement. You're intelligent. It will come to you. No regret, no apology. He said to me to walk it off after I scratched my knee as a child, in the same contemptuous manner when I informed Marlene. She gave a shrug. Sweetheart, what's done is done. The money won't be returned by dwelling. In the end, I worked 2 jobs throughout my first year and took out private loans. I preserved the emails, the declarations, and the evidence. Not to exact retribution. Not at the time, but because I needed to make sure it wasn't just my imagination that caused it to occur. I was not insane. However, I ignored it. They made a difficult choice for the family, I told myself. I hid my anger and swallowed the betrayal. I could see it plainly now. There was more than one treachery. There was a pattern. Additionally, I had been instructed to be silent for so long that I had forgotten what it was like to make a call. What it was. They took the truth away from me. Nor only cash, nor merely a place at the table. They took my position, my voice, my identity. I noticed my reflection in the window as I got to my feet. Although she appeared calm, I could see the fissures behind the woman's eyes as she stared back at me. Years had passed since the cracks first appeared. I wasn't helpless. I had made it through without them. They made something out of ashes that they acted didn't exist. And tonight, a permanent change occurred. They were looking for a me that would comply, grin, take crumbs, and call it love. However, I've changed as a woman. My education fund, bank records, notarized signatures, old paperwork, and images of Beckett's startup website. From the same month my fund vanished were all in my protected cloud folder, which I had not accessed in years. I lingered over the Delphine contact. The only person in this family to ever treat me like a person was her, and she would be the one who still had the courage to tell the truth. I typed after tapping her name. Can we discuss this tomorrow? For a second longer than necessary, my thumb lingered. After I pushed submit, the early light softened the appearance of everything in my flat. I gazed at my mobile device. After that, there was a message that became heavier by the hour. Then it rang. Unreal. I paused. Despite my first inclination to leave it on voicemail, I felt compelled to listen to her voice. Perhaps it was a final opportunity I wanted to offer her. Hey, she said, as if she hadn't sat quietly through my erasure last night, all airy and fake. I just wanted to say hello. After the large supper, how are you feeling? I burst out laughing. Are we referring to that? Supper? A pause. Look, I realize it became strange. You were aware? I interrupted her, I said. Don't act as though you didn't. A protracted hush ensued. Then she let out a sigh. Yes, I was aware. I've been aware for a while. I shut my eyes. It stung more than I thought it would. And you remained silent. Maddie, what was I meant to do? Declare war. Nothing would have changed as a result. All I wanted was serenity. Calm. Once more, that word. Did you not desire peace? Silently, I said. You want solace. There is a distinction. She didn't dispute, simply murmured. I apologize. As if that would reverse the years of cooperation. Without saying another word, I hung up. I wasn't upset. Not at all. Just finished. Completed. Awaiting the development of a backbone. I was standing in front of Delphine's door 2 hours later. I knocked, but she opened it first. Did you come? I said, she said. Her voice was not surprised. Simply something stable, like she had been anticipating for years. Her living room felt like a museum of things the rest of the family had attempted to forget as soon as I walked in. Dusty books, old pictures, a framed letter written by my mother. Delphine wasted no time. She walked to a wooden box next to the bookshelves and stated, I kept everything, because I knew you would eventually come to find the truth. She gave me a folder containing receipts for bank transfers made 2 weeks before to Beckett's debut. Legal papers, account numbers, and signatures. The actual will of my mother came next. There, as plain as day, it was. The money was just intended for my schooling, never to be touched in any situation. I sensed a tiny tilt in the room. And this? I held out a page of lined paper notes that had turned yellow and inquired. I said, she said, after speaking with your father, when he began rewriting history, I put them in writing. You remained silent. You weren't prepared, she said steadily. Now, however, I believe you are now. I refrained from crying. I believed I might. However, I only had a calming sensation. As if the facts were heavy and had just fallen into my grasp, I arranged everything on the kitchen table at home, scanned each sheet, verified the dates, and compared the signatures. There was no longer space for uncertainty. This was not carelessness. This was intentional. They remembered me. They took me away. One choice, one tale. Erasure via erasure. I accessed my legal notes on my laptop and started creating a chronology. Not as a form of retaliation, but to keep in mind to reconstruct the events as they actually occurred. Peace was what they want. I desired the truth, and I felt stable for the first time in years. No whirling, no anxiousness, just guidance. I had no idea what would happen next. However, I was certain of one thing. I would be the one to write it, whatever occurred. A courier envelope arrived under my flat door 2 mornings later. No warning, no knock, just pressure and quiet. Well packaged. A note from Marlon's legal assistant was inside. The wording was clean and businesslike, like when someone hands you a knife and tries too hard to sound courteous, for the sake of keeping the peace. It stated that Ms. Manford Renly is asked to voluntarily withdraw from the estate planning and family trust procedures. A gesture like that would show kindness and an awareness of the larger dynamics of the family, goodwill, and comprehension. They usually dressed up sharp things with sweet phrases. I read it twice. But then again, I then took out a pen, printed a copy, and signed it. Beneath the line, I manually added, "Those who never desired me are not worthy of my money. No audience, no lawyer, no ceremony. Just the facts." I folded it once. I placed it on my kitchen table after sliding it into a simple envelope. Uninvited, my thoughts strayed to an envelope of a different type that never arrived on time. I noticed Marlene's name flashing on my phone while I was in court 2 years ago. It was a brief text. "Your mother suffered a stroke. St. Vincent's is where we are." No context, no urgency. The nurses were changing the sheets when I got there. I was never able to bid them farewell. A quiet woman in scrubs turned to face me and said, "Are you on your way?" she asked again. I am still haunted by their words. I felt as though I had lost both my mother and any last illusion about this family when I left the hospital. Marlene informed me later that night that it was simply one of those things, she said. It didn't seem that serious to me. You were preoccupied with Harland and your job. He didn't mention it again, like mourning ought to have a time limit. In my life, I've forgiven a lot of things, but not that. Never do that. I was back in the present, holding the envelope near the window. The city appeared serene. Cars buzzing past pedestrians. Dogs. The walkways are starting to miss the rain. Between my fingers, I grasped the signed waiver. There was no sense of capitulation. It was a sense of relief. I believed for years that I would become weak if I let go, that I had lost when I left. I knew better now. I would have been broken if I had stayed. I was saved by leaving. I put on my coat, went 2 blocks to the mailbox at the courthouse, and deposited it. No return address, no tracking. A simple cut. I didn't turn around, didn't think twice. I prepared tea when I got home, sat quietly, and the stillness wasn't empty for the first time in years. I owned it. I sat across from my lawyer in a little office, with a glass wall 3 days after Thanksgiving. Between us was a legal pad, which I had been secretly writing notes on for years. Receipts, dates, trends. She turned the pages over. I brought the papers that Delphine had. The transfer logs and my mother's will cemented the deal. She tapped a page with her pen and remarked, "This isn't a fight. This is a declaration." I reclined. "Then let's turn up the volume." She didn't grin. I didn't either. I opened my laptop later that day and started writing an email. Only one. However, it would hit every living blood related like a bomb. Every in-law who ever faked smiled through a betrayal. All of the advisors and attorneys who had assisted in hiding the facts. Subject: I felt that you ought to view this. 4 PDF bank statements with marked transfers were attached. A scan of the original will of my mother. Beckett's corporate timeline screenshots. My name was never on the guest list for that memorial video. Not a single phrase of explanation was added by me. After hitting submit, I turned to leave. Within 15 minutes, my phone began to buzz. Aunts, cousins, and even a second uncle I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Is this authentic? Why didn't you speak out earlier? I got a sense all the time. I paid them all no attention. Harlan remained silent. Nor a phone call, nor a text. Nothing but quiet. It was the same instrument he usually used when he lost control. Marlene, however, did not let us down. Her response was brief. "It's a family issue. Please take it back. Don't apologize. Don't worry. Simply make a demand," disguised as politeness. As the ceiling collapsed, the Queen attempted to control the space. I didn't respond. Beckett disappeared. Not a single phone call, text message, or passive-aggressive subtweet. Darkness. This indicated that he was afraid. Excellent. I had poured myself a glass of red wine and turned off my phone around dusk. I saw headlights flicker across the rainy street as I stood at my window. Not because I was anxious, because I was well aware of what was going to happen next. We started drafting a formal complaint at my lawyer's recommendation. Not that I intended to file a lawsuit. It wasn't because I want the cash. Because the greatest disinfectant is sunshine, and there was plenty of this rot. Retaliation was no longer the focus. It has to do with repair. And this was only the initial blow. It began with murmurs. I was contacted by a partner at the firm where I was a clerk. Not casual material, but a casual tone. "Hello, Maddie. I've heard that you've been making some noise recently. Beckett has been making calls. Claims that you're going through a difficult time. Accuses you of fabricating." I remained still, not even blinking. What precisely did he say? I politely inquired, "You're sick and have family issues. That this is a breakdown of some sort." I chuckled. Keep quiet. Dry. He's making an effort to portray myself as unstable. Indeed, he claimed to be manipulating the story. I hung up after thanking him. Traditional. Beckett. If you are unable to conceal the truth, make the person who says it seem bad. He was lying, using connections, and requesting favors. He was unaware that I had marched through flames to get this point, and I wasn't backing down because he threw smoke. I gave Delphine a call. On the first ring, she responded. "He's attempting to discredit me," I said. "He's afraid." "He ought to be," she said. "I hoped you would give me a call. Something else is involved." She never sent it. So 10 minutes later, she emailed me a file I hadn't seen in years. Official HR complaint from my first employment after law school was scanned. I had overlooked it, or perhaps I had made myself do it at the time because I believed it to be paranoid. I believed I was having hallucinations, a leaking pitch, a lost draft. I couldn't prove it, but the timing had been too good. Up until now, Delphine had preserved every email, header, screenshot, and even the log demonstrating that, when Beckett was assisting me in setting up my home Wi-Fi during a holiday weekend, he had connected into my PC using a remote access program I had foolishly left open. My career had all but collapsed since he had taken my ideas and sold them to a rival company as his own. Delphine's tone faltered a little. I vowed not to tell you because of your father. Claimed that it would simply worsen the situation. I'm sorry I listened to him. I didn't contact my lawyer, but I did thank her. I made a journalistic call. I know a woman who had made a living telling tales like these, betrayal veiled with truth. Beneath silk ties and trust monies, there is scandal. She didn't request evidence. Send everything, she said. The headline was already circulating by morning. An executive in finance is charged with corporate stealing. According to the source, Beckett's company panicked after a family cover-up within hours. Contracts were being pulled by clients. His face disappeared from the business's website. He made his Instagram private. Harlan made 2 attempts to call. I let it to ring. The voicemail that Marlon left was spot on. It nearly made me chuckle. We are embarrassed by you. I hope all is well with you. You were supported by this family, and you pay us back like this? Backed me up? On birthday cards, they couldn't even correctly spell my name. I read emails from random people while I sat in my workplace. At last, one aunt broke down. I was constantly aware that something wasn't right. I ought to have spoken out. It's too late. I had lost my anger. Just be clear. This was hardly a courtroom, but Beckett could tell stories. This was the public opinion court. He had recently lost his jury. I received a message from a previous intern that evening. When she worked for me, she had just graduated from law school. Keep quiet. Wonderful. I was previously overlooked in every manner. She wrote, "Thank you. People like me are made possible by people like you." I didn't grin. Not at all. However, something within me calmed down a bit. They believed that I had set the home on fire. I still hadn't raised my voice. With history in my hands and a folder under my arm, I entered the county clerk's office early the following morning. The complaint had already been written, evaluated, typed, and structured, line by line. Misuse of money from the trust, counterfeiting consent, fiduciary responsibility breach. At the top were 3 names: Harland, Renly, Marlene, R. Renly, Beckett, Renly. Everything they believed I would never find was attached. Affidavits signed by Delphine, notarized bank documents, and authorization paperwork with inconsistent signatures all attest to the original conditions of my mother's will. The records were made public by midday, and by 4 p.m., anyone with a Wi-Fi connection and a purpose to search could access them. I told them the truth. I didn't care what the world did with it. By nightfall, Beckett's LinkedIn account had vanished. A vague announcement regarding a temporary suspension pending internal review had been released by his company. However, I was well aware of it. After a line was subtly placed beneath the board list, Harlan's name vanished off the Veterans Foundation's website. According to the statement, Marlene canceled her cherished charity banquet out of respect for privacy, while an ethical inquiry was underway. Correct. Late that night, I received an SMS from Cyril. I had no idea it would get this far. I took a good look at the screen before responding. You never inquired about how far I had previously gone. Harlan eventually wrote back, but she didn't. His email's subject line: "This family no longer accepts you." It was there. The final piece of the wall they had been constructing between us for decades. Now given to me as a memento. I started a fresh document, typed, stopped, erased, and then typed once more. I didn't send it after that. Rather, the first read it aloud to myself, after writing it down on a notebook. You took me away. I'm just now completing the task you began. I shut off my phone and closed the notepad. Nothing else could be said to them. No more defending, no more evidence, only distance. The authentic sort. As the sun sank behind the metropolitan skyline, I sat at my office. Through the blinds, gold leafing, the news websites continued to swirl. Reposts, articles, and conjecture. On the interior, however, nothing was hollow, not numb. Simply be silent. The silence that results from speaking the truth. Not caring who believes it, it's loud enough to be heard. I threw a dinner party at my house 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. A bottle of wine, roasted carrots, and roast chicken, nothing spectacular. It was not the label that I picked for. With her peaceful, reassuring presence, Delphin arrived early with apple pie. Uncertain of whether they were overdressed or underexperienced, one of my interns arrived with her girlfriend and nervous laughs. One of my running club friends provided stories without lawsuits or betrayals, along with garlic bread. Around my kitchen table, we sat, real, little, and scratched. No place cards. No toasts. No veiled barbs, acting as though they are praises. We distributed food. We discussed books, bad movies, and inside jokes. There were no power struggles or hierarchies. Only people. Only a link. Delphine assisted me with dishwashing after dessert. She didn't have to speak, so she didn't. She had proud, steady gaze. I went to a peaceful cemetery on the outskirts of town by myself the next morning. I only brought a note, no flowers. Even though I wasn't certain if I believed in any kind of afterlife, I sat by my mother's grave and read it out loud. Mom, I did it. I maintained my composure. I didn't mention your name. I no longer reside in their home. They don't have control over me. The leaves were blown about my boots. Weighted with a tiny rock, I folded the letter and placed it under the stone face. I refrained from crying. All I did was breathe. After that, I departed. My phone rang with a voicemail later that day. I didn't have to pay attention. Before I erased it, I saw the name, Marlene. Still, I hit play, just long enough to hear the melody. You achieved your goal. Everything was lost. I wish you pride. I put a stop to it. I removed it. She didn't hear pride in my quiet. Peace prevailed. They believed that I was trying to steal something from them. However, the reality was more straightforward. All I had to do was regain myself. I had a cup of tea and a peaceful house that night while I sat in bed. I surveyed the area I had created. Not flawless, but mine. I considered all that they had taken, followed by all that I had recovered. There were certain wounds that would never heal. Tidy. It doesn't operate that way. They didn't have to, though. Closure wasn't necessary for me to proceed. All I needed was clarity. People who merely came to take would not fill the empty spots, in my opinion. I chose tranquility over acting as though I chose myself, truth over tolerance, and isolation over illusion. They referred to me as ungrateful, but now more than ever I'm thankful. Thankful that I left at last. Walking away isn't always a sign of weakness. It's sagacity. I worked for years to gain a seat at a table that was never intended for me. Tried to show my value to those who had already made up their minds about me. Here's what I've discovered, though. There is no peace. You make it. Blood is not what defines a family. It's about safety, honesty, and respect. Mending isn't necessarily about making amends. It just signifies releasing at times. This is your opportunity to let go of whatever burdens you may be carrying that are not yours. You have the right to keep your peace. You are free to start rewriting your own tale without anyone's permission. I'll give it over to you immediately. Have you ever had to leave a family version in order to discover who you are? Do you think that keeping quiet promotes harmony or only serves to prolong harm? Please leave a comment below or let me know where you're viewing from if this tale resonated with you or helped you understand anything better. Telling me why you didn't connect with it is okay. I've read it all, and if you're still here and listening, please remember to press the subscribe button for more truthful stories. Remind us that we are not alone and stir our hearts. Till the next occasion, treat yourself like you would a loved one.